By now, and by that I mean after X number of decades, we should all be very well accustomed to the fact that as our liturgical year comes to a close, the church turns our mind and attention to the end of time itself, the completion of human history and the consummation of God's original creative intent. And so the readings take on this apocalyptic flavor. We have today's first reading from the book of the prophet Daniel. And then in today's gospel, according to St. Mark, we just need a little review to put today's gospel into its proper context, because as you recall from last week, we saw Jesus Christ with his disciples in the temple, and the Lord had stationed himself by the temple treasury, taking note of the amount of money people were depositing. And when a widow comes along to put in her last 2 small coins, virtually worth nothing, the Lord draws his attention to her. And of course, then we got the teaching on the widow's mite. Immediately after that, Jesus gets up with his disciples and they're exiting the temple precincts. But as they're exiting, the disciples are beginning to remark about how beautiful the temple is and all of its adornments. The reaction of the Lord was not anticipated, because instead of agreeing with how spectacular and beautiful the temple was, Jesus begins to wax apocalyptic. And he starts talking about the end of time. And says that, yes, this building, it will be torn down, and not one stone will be left upon another. I'm not going to lie to you, there's always a great difficulty in trying to preach on the apocalyptic literature found in the sacred scriptures. Even the fathers of the church struggled with trying to find some kind of concrete meaning, because you're presented with so many layers. And there are so many figures, and there are so many symbols, and it's hard to decipher what do you take literally, what do you take figuratively, what exactly is being spoken about. Does it mean now? Is it in the future? So on and so forth. And the thing that's kind of ironic about it is that the word apocalypse, by its very definition, means revelation. And apocalyptic literature, at the end of the day, doesn't really clarify a whole lot. It seems to confuse. It seems to confuse. But nonetheless, let's do our level best to tackle what Jesus Christ is getting to when he is talking about the destruction of the temple and what on earth that has to do with the end of the world at the end of time before he returns in glory. And so we have to enter into all of these, different layers and understand how they relate to one another. Because when we look at the temple itself, the literal building of the temple in Jerusalem, where sacrifice was offered, and of course the daily prayers, Jesus looks upon the temple, as simply being a sign of his own physical body. Because what does the temple represent? The temple represents the dwelling place of God on earth. Well, the Word became flesh and began to dwell among us. And so it is the literal, physical, human body of Jesus Christ is the true temple of God that was prefigured, that was signified by a building made of stone. And so at the end of the day, you can't have two temples. You can't have two places where you say God dwells. It's got to be one or the other. Which will it be? And Jesus Christ makes it explicitly clear that the temple that will remain is the one of his body. And just like the temple in Jerusalem will be destroyed in the year 70 A.D. to signify the passing away of the old covenant because the new has been inaugurated in place of it, we see the figure of the destruction of Christ's own body in his passion and death, and the revelation that a new age has begun in his resurrection from the dead. And so for Jesus Christ, these two things are interchangeable. The destruction of the temple in 70 A.D. and his own passion and death 37 years previous. And so he easily shifts, between the two, but then certainly causes a lot of confusion, not intentionally, but a lot of confusion ensues on account of it. And of course it is these two things ultimately relate to the second coming of Jesus Christ when he returns in glory at the end of time. Because then what is established? The kingdom of God, perfect and definitive. There will be the end of sin, the end of death, and there will be no need, as the scriptures tell us, of light from the sun or the moon or the stars, because in St. John's vision of the heavenly Jerusalem, the new heavens, the new earth, reported to us in the book of Revelation, it is Jesus Christ himself will be the lamp that gives light to all. And so we see how easy it is, to drift between all of these things. So then it begs the question, it's like, then what is the point of all of this apocalyptic literature in the first place? Because see, when I was talking about how apocalyptic literature tends to confuse and confound more than it illuminates and clarifies, I think what's going on is our morbid curiosity of knowing all the juicy details about how the world will end and what it's going to look like, and is it going to hurt? And if we're going to look at apocalyptic literature for those answers, you're going to come up with a great big tough. Those aren't the answers that are going to be revealed because they're irrelevant. They're irrelevant. And so what becomes, at the end of the day, the point of apocalyptic literature? And it is precisely to give hope. That's the takeaway. It's hope. What do I mean by that? How can we justify that claim? Well, we need to look at when apocalyptic literature is written. What's going on in the world when the Holy Spirit inspires the sacred authors of the Scriptures to write what they write in a matter and style we call apocalyptic. Also, we look at the book of the prophet Daniel. Well, first and foremost, we need to understand, that Daniel lived in the 6th century BC. Okay, and if you go back into your history, recall that it was during that century that Nebuchadnezzar led the Babylonians into Judah, destroyed Jerusalem, tore down the temple, and then exiled all of the Jews back to Babylon. And it's during this period of exile that Daniel is living. And he's having these extraordinary visions to give comfort and consolation and hope to those in Israel, that what they had just been through could literally be called the end of the world, their world. But the book of Daniel, curiously enough, while held in memory and in oral tradition, actually was not written down until 4 centuries later, the 2nd century BC. Well, why would that be? What's going on in the 2nd century in ancient Palestine? Well, you need to go to the book of Maccabees. Look it up. Alexander the Great, had conquered the known world. He had died, and he had split up his kingdom between a variety of successors. And after a couple generations, along comes a man of particular evil and malice who had control of Palestine, Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And he began to persecute terribly the Jews that were struggling to remain faithful in Palestine. And so it's a time of great distress. It's a time when it seems as though their world is crumbling down and coming to an end. We look at the book of Revelation. When was it written? The end of the 1st century. What was going on at the end of the 1st century? Well, there's St. John, the sacred author. Where is he at? He's in prison. He's on an island in Patmos. And the church, meanwhile, is being terribly and fiercely persecuted in a variety of places. And he's writing them to give them encouragement. Because what's the one main theme that all the apocalyptic literature has? It gives us in a cosmic perspective on things. And what it reveals is this cosmic struggle, this cosmic battle between good and evil. Not in the manner of Star Wars. We're not talking about dualism, where there's like equal powers of evil and good, and we're betting on the white horse. That's not how it works. God is sovereign. Full stop. God is sovereign. It's just that there's a pesky little creature that rebelled against his plan that we call Satan, who's going to disrupt and introduce order and chaos, sin and death into the world that God created and pronounced good. The interesting thing is that the devil knows that his time is very short. And we may think, well, thousands upon thousands of years doesn't seem like a short time. Well, because you're not thinking cosmically. You're thinking in terms of your 80-year-old lifespan. Right? But from a cosmic perspective, this is not a long time. The devil knows his time is very short. And the closer he sees the end, the angrier he becomes. And so we're caught up, as it were, in this drama, where we see, the lies, the malice, the discord, the chaos, the disruption, the death. It's ultimately what the devil is after, the death. But so now we're going to come back full circle, because what I'm going to, make known to you is that apocalyptic literature is very clarifying. Because what it all pronounces at the end of the day is that God is victorious over these things. Why? Because Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. And so when we find ourselves in times of distress, and please allow me to reassure you, we're not living in times of unsurpassed distress, regardless of what people on social media like to believe and hope others will also believe. Nonetheless, at the end of the day, in all of our trials, all of our difficulties, when we're visited, by misfortune, and it feels like for us it's the end of the world, what is the function of apocalyptic literature? It's to step back and take a more cosmic, well, no, but it's happening to me. It's happening to me. I don't care about the cosmos. Well, again, tough. Because we have to look at it from how God sees it. From how God sees it. We need to put our little insignificant self in its proper perspective. That's what humility requires. To look at more the cosmic perspective on things. And look that, yes, it's not about you, it's about us. Things may affect us personally, but we're all in the same boat, which, as the saying goes, is the reason why we're all seasick. Right? And so we come back to that which is most important. It's most important. Far too many people spend way too much time trying to figure out all the juicy details about what the end of the world will look like. As far as I'm concerned, let them. Let them. The day will come and catch them like a trap. They will be the ones caught unawares. What does Jesus Christ say? What is his counsel? Be awake. Be alert. Keep your head in the game. How? Pray. Pray. Remain faithful. Fulfill the duties of your state in life. And don't think about, worry about, or allow yourself to get shaken out of your heads by the things people do. But what God has already done, he's won. He's victorious. What we need is less fear, more faith, and certainly more hope.